Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon and welcome to the press conference further to the informal ministerial meeting dedicated to the subject of cohesion policy held here in Murcia. We have the General Secretary of European Funds, Mercedes Caballero, and the Cohesion Reform Commissioner, Luisa Ferreira, to inform us of the conclusions of this meeting. There will be a round of Q&A after their presentations. When you start, please give your name and the media you represent when you take the floor. And please just stick to issues that were on the agenda of today's meeting if you raise questions. I'd now like to give the floor to the Secretary General. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending this press conference here today. I'm accompanied by the Cohesion and Reform Policy Commissioner Luisa Ferreira. Thank you very much, as I say, for being here. Welcome to the city of Murcia and to this fantastic building, the artillery headquarters, where we have held our informal ministerial. The Treasury, Cohesion Ministry welcomed here the European Commission, the Member States, and given the importance of this subject, we also invited the European Investment Bank, the Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of the Regions, all of which are very much involved in developing the policy and the implementation of cohesion policy. During our meeting, we discussed important issues such as the future of the cohesion policy once we get to the end of the current MMF 21 to 27. And this is a process that is being led by the European Commission. In order to give impetus to this debate, we asked the Committee of the Regions and the European Economic and Social Committee to produce two opinions, and it was a pleasure to hear from both of those institutions here today. We all know that cohesion policy has been and remains a fundamental pillar for European integration. And this is something which all of the institutions and all the member states agree with. We share the vision that this is what can generate development and reform, bringing together the regions of Europe, convergence of the regions, and the main guiding principle is that nobody should be left behind. As part of the response to the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, we have the recovery and resilience mechanism that was put forward by the Commission. This is something also that is a historical milestone in the development of European integration. This mechanism, the RRM, was the subject of broad consensus on the part of all member states as a response to the COVID crisis and has led to unprecedented developments to the social economic fabric of the member states and has also contributed to the European integration project. As a result, we are now at a crucial point in time where we need to reflect on the lessons that can be learned from the management of both of these instruments and to ensure that we then benefit from that analysis to develop our future policy, and all of that in line with the cohesion objective pursuant to Article 174 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, which is for harmonious, cohesive development of the European Union. So on that basis, with harmonious development, we want to ensure that the least developed regions, along with the most advanced regions, can work together, can cooperate, so that there is leverage and that this then provides impetus so that we can all work together and make the most of what we have. The cohesion policy has worked well and has to continue to be an instrument of solidarity between the peoples of Europe. That is something essential, as we've said from the outset, since we started the European integration project. We focused first on just how we can manage the programming of the cohesion policy. What type of action should we be able to carry out under this programme? Adjusting policies depending on the characteristics of individual regions, so tailor-made, ensuring that public policy is a place-based approach. So in other words, a least developed region in the south of Europe and a given country shouldn't even within a convergence region, shouldn't be treated in the same way as other, because it may have a different history, different socio-economic development for another least developed region elsewhere in Europe. So the idea is that one size does not fit all. So really, we cannot tar everyone with the same brush, treat everyone in the same way. One size doesn't fit all. We have to continue to tailor our policies to the individual needs of our regions, and all the member states agreed on that particular point. We also agreed that we need to guarantee and provide impetus to the governance of this to make sure that we can deal with the major challenges that we face. And there we stressed the importance of the different EU institutions. We had CRE 1, CRE 2, which was a response to the pandemic crisis. But let's not forget, cohesion policy also has its own objective, which is convergence, and that is a long-term objective. During the course of the meeting, the member states also brought forward interesting ideas, and we will work together on this in order to develop the next version of the cohesion policy, what we've called Cohesion Policy 2.0, which is for the programming period 28 to 35, so post-2027. In addition, the Spanish presidency is going to try to come forward with a number of conclusions at the General Affairs Council on the 30th of November, based on all of the contributions that have been made in the interim. The presidency believes that the sole objective has to be to ensure the future of Cohesion Policy 2.0 post-2027. We have to go back to the basic objective that has guided this, which is to ensure this harmonised development of the entire European Union. Cohesion policy has to base its analysis. Cohesion 2.0 has to take account of the context of the various different regions with a new set of indicators, which enables this adaptation to this place-based approach, using a new set, as I said, of indicators, and that means we'll have to work with Eurostat, the European institutions, the Commission, the member states, to make sure we have the databases so that we have as many indicators as possible to properly plan, and one that is more tailor-made, as I said, place-based approach. Furthermore, the cohesion policy has to be capable of identifying co-financing rates. With this place-based approach, it will reflect the reality of the individual regions, so it'll be much more flexible, and that's something that was also agreed on by everyone around the table. Then we have to look at the governance of this. Often what we find is that reforms can then leverage further investments, but it's important that we coordinate with the specific needs of each in every region. We've analysed the two mechanisms, so the RF and the cohesion policy, and a lot of member states say that maybe it's still too early to carry out a real evaluation, proper evaluation in depth of which mechanism applies. But we certainly would be prepared to continue discussing this to ensure that there's effective governance mechanism in place. We also stress the importance of having a partnership principle, shared partnership, shared management with the Commission. What does that mean? Well, that means that we decide together, member state, Commission, regions, local authorities, so multi-level governance. This is something that we've had in place for many years, for more than 30 years in Spain. We've established cooperation, coordination mechanisms. They're already very consolidated in Spain. Another point which we all agreed on, and I'm sure that the Commissioner would agree, it's not easy, but that is on reducing the administrative burden. It is essential that we do that. We've got national control systems. We've got the budget of individual member states, and on that we have to justify specifically, we have the criteria in place from the cohesion policy, and we have to make sure that we comply with all of these criteria. We are all very familiar with that whole management process, but as we go through the programme, we want to try to reduce that red tape and simplify slowly but surely all of the different management governance mechanisms without losing any rigour within those control and checks. Then finally, the cohesion policy has to lead to the strategic autonomy of the European Union, especially given the current geopolitical backdrop and context, and we have to look at this also in a longer-term way. We believe that the cohesion policy, as we've seen in previous programming periods, we have to ensure that the big companies in strategic sectors for the future, that they remain on European soil and that they can grow and develop. Thank you very much, and I'd like to give the floor to the Commissioner.
Muchas gracias, Mercedes. Dear journalists, in fact, as the Director General just mentioned, today we had a high-level discussion on the future of cohesion policy. So I would start by thanking the Spanish presidency for the very, very interesting exchanges. And in fact, we converge in cohesion policy, in recognizing that cohesion policy has proven its worth time and again ever since its inception. The transformative power of the policy is visible everywhere, also here in Murcia, where cohesion investments have changed completely the region and the city, and they have financed a very, very big number of projects, but I would just quote, for instance, el Observatorio del Mar Menor, en aras de mejor monitorizar y preservar el ecosistema marino, así como en el desarrollo de proyectos de investigación. But they have also supported innovative companies. I would just quote, among many others, Navilens, that develops cutting-edge technology for the visually impaired. Or they have financed something that I just used yesterday, like the high-speed railway linking Murcia to the other regions of Spain. So cohesion policy is there. Therefore, our starting point is that cohesion works. It has an excellent track record in helping poorer regions converge and remains an essential unifying factor for European integration in the crisis also of the last few years. Cohesion policy has also taken a new role during those crises. I'm referring to the COVID crisis, I'm referring to the refugees that came in from Ukraine, like the energy increase of prices that was caused by the Russian use of energy also as a weapon. And so in the last few years, cohesion policy has been what I call a great stabilizer. For all these reasons that I just mentioned, and in fact, cohesion policy has been able to adapt and to be able to change legislation with the cooperation with the European Parliament and the Council in order in a couple of weeks to be able to transfer money to tackle these problems, these dramatic problems. So several times we had new legislation in fact approved in a couple of weeks, allowing for cohesion funds to support people, to support business, to support authorities. So cohesion policy paid for everything you can imagine, from ventilators in hospitals to computers in schools to vaccines, and coping with the hardship of crisis. Several studies that we'll be presenting soon show just how important our crisis support has been. One comparison I find particularly striking is with the financial crisis in 2008 and 2010 and 11. Recovery then was very asymmetric. What do I mean? Some regions, after 2008 crisis, some regions bounced back almost immediately. But others, the weakest ones, suffered a lot and continued to decline for years after the crisis. In the present case, after COVID, thanks to this quick support from cohesion policy funds, and I would like to tell you that the countries asked the Commission, and they were allowed to transfer money from regional funds, social fund, to tackle these emergencies, and 24 billion euros were in fact mobilized across Europe, and other instruments were created. And by 2021, most regions, the strongest but also the weakest ones, had come back to the pre-pandemic GDP level. In our discussions today, we drew lessons from these last years and we looked ahead to the emerging challenges such as climate transition, digital revolution or demographic changes. Our policies need to adapt and remain relevant facing these challenges. In my intervention, I underlined, however, 3 things that we should retain and 3 things that we should adapt. I will start with the 3 points to retain on which I think there was general agreement, which were the pillars of the policy and the firm foundation of our success. First, the policy, although it was very efficient in emergency, is a long-term development policy that brings convergence. And the method is quite relevant. First, the place-based approach. So it's a policy that is not top-down. It has got to come top-down in the general framework, but then bottom-up. So the cohesion policy should remain focused on the specificities of each region, because, in fact, one size doesn't fit all. And every place is different from the other. So coming bottom-up is absolutely essential. Second, multi-level governance involving European, national, local levels, because each level brings it competencies, different, expertise, strengths, capacities. Third, partnership principle, involving the participation of all stakeholders, including civil society, in the conception, implementation, monitoring of what we decide in cohesion policy and what we finance. Local roots, local democracy are one of the secrets of the success of cohesion policy. So these 3 pillars must remain at the core of the policy. But there are 3 other areas where we must be open to adaptation, and we are, and change. That's why we stimulated also this debate. First, flexibility and simplification. There is no doubt that this has been essential in our crisis. I just illustrated it, and needs to be better integrated in our legislation for the future. I'm also in favor of further simplifications, especially in the delivery system, to make the policy more user and beneficiary friendly. A second point, which merits further development, is that the European funding is only part of the solution. One of the key issues we are facing is the development traps, some regions that reach a certain level and then they don't go on progressing. And this failing to converge, or regions which are falling into a talent development trap, that means losing the best, most qualified young people. So these are issues that require that also the quality of the plans and the quality of the use of instruments is refined. So we need institutions and the quality of the institutions, including civil services and the public administration, to be able to devise with more capacity how we can improve the plans. We should reflect on how to further associate reforms to our investments, for sure. The third point, which merits further development, is the role of other policies in promoting convergence. If convergence is really such an important aspect, we have got to make it a political priority also in member states. And it is increasingly clear that promoting cohesion cannot be the work of cohesion policy alone. We must continue integrating cohesion policy's DNA of bringing forward convergence and objectives in other policies at the European and at the national level, so that they operate on the principle of do no harm to cohesion. On all these points, we still have time to reflect. We are inviting all stakeholders to contribute to our discussions on the future of cohesion policy, and this meeting was quite relevant for that effect. I have also set up what we call a high-level working group of experts who are working, and it is web streamed, so you can follow it, the discussions within this group, But we are calling for contributions, we are receiving contributions, and these contributions will feed in the upcoming 9th cohesion report that we will publish in spring next year. Our goal is to modernize cohesion policy so that it continues to be, and I quote the World Bank, a great convergence engine, so something that is really an engine for convergence, and a great stabilizer also in times of crisis, because no union can survive if there is no internal cohesion. So this is really a discussion that is on the ground, on the tables, so all your interest is much welcomed in this debate. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a ambas.
Thank you very much to both of you. Right, let's begin questions. Let me remind you to give your name and which medium you represent. Tania Costa, La Verdad de Murcia. You talked about a set of new indicators. What is Spain's position on that? And for the region of Murcia that does benefit from these funds, will these indicators be good for us? That's the first question. And the second question, in the region of Murcia, there are complaints because budgets can be drawn up because we don't have the accounts and payments into the accounts of the autonomous. Can we have money sent, or is there going to be an extension until the money is actually sent?
Respondo a la...
I can answer the first question. The indicators we're talking about don't refer... It's just the proposals so far in the member states. We need to go into it in greater depth, and we need to start working with the other institutions, Eurostat, for example, and the Commission, so that we have sufficient data that will allow us to have a programming that is much closer to the grassroots. Now, as you say, how could it affect Murcia? Well, it could affect Murcia because the programming carried out both by the regional authorities of Spain and the various ministry and the autonomous community. When you look at Murcia, in all of this, they will have the possibility of having a larger menu to choose from that is more commensurate with the needs. So the idea is that to have indicators that say, look, my programming should be like this because I'm basing myself on this data and this is what I need. So what we now, member states, need to do is to look at the different categories that we have, look at the availability of resources, and also look at a menu. So basically look at all the activities that can be carried out, and that's when I say we need to adjust more to the reality of each region. So these indicators, they're information, it's data that can help us. As to your second question, I'm afraid I can't answer that because that's not part of my remit.
Well, on this question of the indicators, I would like to say that, that in fact it's in the proposals of the presidency. The distribution of the cohesion funding across member states also already includes a lot of other indicators. The core is GDP per capita, but a lot of other indicators have been introduced with time, with a lot of political negotiation in the composition of what we call the Berlin formula. Coming to the level of the regions, the principle why GDP is used to guarantee that there is a principle of proportionality. All the regions across Europe receive funding, not all the regions, all the countries receive funding. And in principle, most regions receive funding, but they receive in a proportionality, under a proportionality principle, which means if the region or the country is strong enough to help itself, it receives per inhabitant relatively less funding from the European taxpayers than if you have a different kind of situation. If you are weaker, you are more financed. One area where the indicators must be taken into account is necessarily when you prepare the development plan, because then all the indicators have got to be used in devising what will be the future for that region and how you should use the different instruments. Because, in fact, that's the practical recognition that one size doesn't fit all. So a region that is going through a transition, industrial transition, has a different kind of recipe, so to speak, than a region that is a rural area that is losing all the population and becoming very old. So taking into account all the indicators in the preparation, discussion of the plan and monitoring of the plan and choice of instruments, I think this is really the core of what we need to address. On other uses of different indicators, we have got really to reflect very thoroughly on that, to avoid that we open a Pandora's box that will never be closed anymore. But it is food for thought.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, Sergio Gomez, Onda Regional de Murcia. I have a couple of questions. Firstly, the indicators in the new future cohesion policy, will that mean that in Spain from the 28-35 period might receive less money because there's more regions that fall under the European average income? So might we lose out on financing? And another question for the Secretary, there was a formal complaint made by the region of Murcia because it wasn't actually invited to these meetings that were organized by the government of Spain.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. On the indicators and the impact that they might have on the funding that will be given to the different member states, well, this is something we can't say anything about at the moment. As the Commission said, we've got resources, we've got indicators, per capita income, and there are many other indicators on unemployment and other indicators such as this. So basically what we're saying, how we can adjust, because it just doesn't fit the reality as to what Spain is going to get in the future, what the regions are going to get in the future. We're far, far from being able to give you an answer to that. Basically, we have to reach an agreement between the member states to start off with, and then, so we're far off from that. As to the participation of the region of Murcia in this meeting, in fact, the institutions of the region are going to join us now because we're going to visit projects of the European structural funds here in the region. But the meeting itself is a meeting of the presidency of the council, and the member states as such are invited. That is how it is. That's the only reason. But of course, participation and cooperation with regional authorities is good, that we've always worked very closely with them. And as I said, proof of this is that we're now going to go together to visit some of the projects that have been funded by the structural fund.
Also to your question, and this is, I mean, a request. Spain is a top beneficiary of cohesion policy and a top beneficiary of recovery and resilience facility, which will have to be executed until 2026. So if I can ask you, I mean, let's concentrate on what in Europe we are doing with the funds rather than discussing permanently amounts. It is, as Mercedes just mentioned, it's too early to have this discussion, but please focus on the right choices for the right use, including all the discussion and with stakeholders. Let's do the utmost and let's make sure that this unique opportunity to stimulate convergence inside Spain and to also help Spain to converge even more with the top European countries is rightly used with this exceptional amount of funding that is being transferred to Spain, because this is really an important historic moment, I would say. It's not only Spain, it's a lot of other countries across Europe, but yes, it's more important to discuss the substance rather than moving forward and discussing the funding for 2028. Let's see what you can do and we can do, all of us, with the present funding that we have. Thank you. Gracias.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Informativos Telecinco. Quería
I have a question for the Secretary General. Could you assess how the European funds have been implemented in Spain? Have they contributed to the economic development, and does it reach the real economy?
Permítame que distinga entre
Well, let me draw distinction between two instruments. We've got the traditional cohesion policy, which is what we're looking at today, and then you've got part of the recovery and resilience mechanism. It's not quite the same as cohesion, but it acts in the same areas. Now, in general terms, the impact has been extraordinarily positive. It has contributed to developing projects. It has reached the real economy. There's absolutely no doubt of that at all. But often we confuse the payments of the funds and the transformation of our economy. But it's not always like that. It's not as simple as that. A project might take 4 years to be to get up and running. There might be a refinancing mechanism, but until the project is finalized, we're not going to have any assessment from the Commission on the impact it's had. But what is quite clear, it has had a positive income. Now, how has it impacted Spanish growth? For more than 30 years now, we have seen increasing cohesion in Spain, and I say this in front of the Commissioner. Commissioner, we've never lost funds in any programming period, and we've done this by cooperating with all the governments, all the administrations. Please keep in time, because we are talking about co-governance here. We have these central administration of the state, all the autonomous communities and the local authorities in this system of general co-governance. As I said, this has been working for years now, and never today have we lost funds. And that's the idea that we have at the back of our minds. What we want is that these funds continue contributing to the economic development in Spain. And I know the Commissioner herself has given you some examples of funding that can be given to the region of Murcia, but there are many projects have already been carried out: infrastructure, environment, health, education, where European funds have played a very fundamental role in rural areas as well as urban. As to the recovery and resilience mechanism, that is working in synergy with the cohesion policy. But what we want to do is come up with a central pillar of the mechanism, because its period of funding is different. In cohesion, it's 21 to 27. That's the programming period, plus 2 years, so running up to 29. And what we've done is designed a program, a very ambitious one, a set of products in cooperation with all the levels of government, as I said. So very positive evaluation.
Buenas tardes.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm from the Opinión de Murcia. I'd like to ask, you said, of course, we can't just talk about money, but you said you need to cut your cloth to fit properly. What has happened before? Was there a problem with statistics in the past when we talk about a region which is sometimes poor with great inequalities? And will the enlargement of the EU impact all of this? So, with a view to the future enlargement, I mean, in our region, we have a school failure failure rate that is serious. So when we look at these indicators you talk about, are you going to be aware of the fact that the regions aren't all uniform? But the fact that you said we've got to cut the cloth to fit, but I think there's not going to be enough cloth to go around. It's going to be a very tight fit. So what is your approach to the future distribution of funds?
Sí, luego contesto.
Sí, muy bien, muy bien. I'm not sure if I completely understood the question that you were putting forward, but I think one of the aspects that I should really underline is the fact that the purpose of the funds is that you don't need the funds in the future. The purpose of having funds is to stimulate a growth that is self-sustained, that is robust. So the purpose of the funds is not to keep the funds forever, because there will be enlargement, there are changes. When you talk about the situation of regions like Murcia or other regions across Spain, I think the crucial aspect is that with the funds, and the funds are very, very strong here, that also the plan that you have, the vision that you have, where Murcia or where Spain wants to be in 2030 is incorporated in the strategy in which you organize the funds. I came yesterday from a discussion on another type of problem, completely different from the problem of Murcia, when we were discussing in Sigüenza the future for the rural areas. The rural areas in Spain are a problem, a different kind of problem, because they are losing a lot of population, and so you need to have a strategy that creates good living conditions in the centers that still exist, try to find other activities that can really anchor employment in those areas. In the case of Murcia, also yesterday I was in a meeting with the president of region, and we discussed what is the core issue. Murcia is growing, so let's see how we can, in Murcia, with the available instruments, increase the productivity and increase the salaries and increase the quality of the economic basis of Murcia. This is something that we cannot decide in Brussels. We created conditions, we create the instruments, we organize the funding, but then it is up to the national government and up to the regions to organize the funding and the instruments so that, in fact, in theory, you don't need funds anymore, and you use the funds to grow and to foster development. Having said this, I would also like to underline that often cohesion is kind of a responsibility of Europe. No, it's a responsibility of all of us, of the regions, of the countries, and of course we are offering a framework that is quite important, because sometimes it's very clear to see what is the contribution of cohesion policy when you make an exercise. What would be the situation of Spain or of Murcia if cohesion funding had not been there, in the development strategy and in the emergency of the last years? If the funds were not there, what would be the situation? So, in a nutshell, I think, of course, we are flexible. Of course, we respond to the needs of the regions, but the responsibility is at the level of the regions, at the level of the country. We, in full cooperation and support and financial support and technical support from the cohesion policy that is taxpayers' money, in fact, that we manage from Brussels.
Pues poco más.
Well, I think there's very little to add to what the Commissioner has said. She explained it very well. Murcia also has rural areas, certainly, but their specific characteristics are different to those that we saw yesterday in a different meeting. So those indicators should try and measure and better define the reality on the ground.
Me gustaría.
Could you say something about the meetings that you had in the margins of the meeting? Did you see Murcia? Did you like the city? You said you're going to meet the authorities later on. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, there is a long time since I didn't come to Murcia. And I recognize a different city, much more modern, much more developed, much greener. But this is just a first impression of someone that arrived yesterday. So I think I will have to come again personally, because I know quite well Spain since I was a child. And so there was, in fact, a long time since I was not coming here. From the statistical work, from the information, from reading, I think, in fact, we look at what we can improve. And in fact, I think in the case of Murcia, you don't have the same problem that you have in other regions of Spain. So you have young people, but for me, it's still a reason for concern to have a very high level of unemployment of young people. And at the same time, having a lot of companies asking for employers and complaining that they don't have enough workers. So there is something here that also deserves a bit of reflection, how to bridge this difference of having people that are in theory available to work, and at the same time having a scarcity of labor force in the companies. So but of course this is not for us to solve, but this is one of the issues that I think deserves reflection, together with this agenda for innovation and the agenda for the environment. And you are here in very close to Mar Menor, so we hope that in fact the environmental problems also in that area are definitely solved, and we would really, we have a lot of hope that once that now the situation of the emergency hopefully is passed, that in fact we go back to our agenda, and this agenda can really be important in innovation, in bridging these differences, and in also using environmental aspects as a source, also a competitiveness for the local companies. So there is a lot of opportunity, and this is the message to go on improving and growing towards a very, very competitive area where you have young people performing and living a very good life. That's our hope.
Ambas y pues
Thank you very much to both of you, and thank you also for your participation.